Okay. Well, this is the ProZ.com, the 2004 edition of the annual virtual conference. And today we've got a list of panelists for the MT for Freelancers. This is what everyone's waiting for. I've been waiting 10 years to see this happen, and we finally got 3 panelists here just burning, coming to want to talk about what they're doing, and this is really good. These are panelists. Some of them actually have been quite active in the discussion forums and ProZ in the past year. That's why I asked them to actually come on and tell us what they're doing. So we're going to go around and find out a little bit more about Dimitro and about Patrick and Michael. So Dimitro, can you tell us who you are, where you're from, your background a little bit on this MT topic?
Sure. So thank you, Jeff, for the introduction, and welcome everybody to this panel. So my name is Dimitro Anastasiou. I was born in Greece. I have been working as a freelance translator since 2006 for the language pairs English, German, and Dutch into Greek, and vice versa. However, only as a part-time job because I am more active in research. But still in machine translation, so I studied my university degree. I obtained it from the Department of Foreign Languages, Translation and Interpreting in Greece at the Ionian University. And later I continued with my PhD at the Saarland University in Germany. The title was Machine Translation and Idiom Processing, so this was the topic. After that, I did a postdoc for 2 years in Ireland at the Localization Research Centre. The project was called Centre for Next Generation Localization Project. And after that, I came back to Bremen in Germany, where I live here now, and I'm working on research again on multimodality and multilingualism. A little bit different, but still trying to keep the MT into play and try different solutions. And I have been also working as a trainer for the Master CAWEB at the University of Strasbourg as external lecturer, where I did some training for Trados and Pasolo. That's it for me.
Great. Patrick, tell us about yourself.
Okay, I've been a translator since 1999. I was completing a linguistics degree when I started to do some financial translations. I work in Spanish, Italian, and Portuguese into English, and I've tried to use technology throughout that time, and I've just started using some internet-based resources, and that's sort of how I got into using machine translation. And I was first interested in Google Translate, and lately my interests have geared more toward systems that I could use on my own hardware instead of publicly or through any kind of internet-based applications.
Great. Thanks so much, Patrick. Michael, tell us about yourself, what you're doing for this kind of MT. How did you get into this?
Well, I started translating quite a while ago. My mother had a translation agency. She's a freelance agent, and so I sort of I started translating to help my mother out occasionally, and then it sort of evolved into a full-time job, which I've been doing for a while now. I do only Dutch into English. I'm Dutch American, so basically, but I don't want to translate into Dutch because I've always spoken English at home. I sort of started using machine translation, I suppose. I used to use Trados Workbench back a long time ago, and then I moved to MemoQ. The MemoQ was probably the first basically. And then I switched to CafeTran, which is my castle at the moment. So my experience with machine translation is sound problems, I think.
That's better. Good, thanks.
Can you hear me now?
That's good. That's better, thanks.
Okay. So yeah, basically my experience with now using it in CafeTran, and I'm interested in new ways that the developer which is added to use it basically in cafe tools. I think I'm getting feedback on my sound here.
We'll be able to. I think we'll be okay for the rest of the session. We shouldn't be too much of a problem. Well, thanks, Michael. And for the audience, my name is Jeff Allen. Some people call me the godfather of machine translation. I don't have enough gray hair yet, but I think I've put probably 1,000 posts in ProZ.com over the past year and all these forums about MT, and we decided that rather than writing about it, we'd do a little, like Barbara Streisand said, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So we're doing a video of this. And so it's not me answering questions. I'm asking the questions to our panelists. So this is hopefully the opportunity to see how 3 different people who are all freelancers have decided to take the journey and the adventure into using machine translation in different ways. And we're going to find out more how they're doing it so that the rest of you freelancers out there are 8,500 people in this conference today, can find that there's not a single solution or a single one-size-fits-all, but that different people are doing it different ways, and it's working for them, and it can work for you too. So what we'll do is go around and if we can, have each of you tell your story of what you're doing, how you've made it work for you, and how it's been successful, and even don't hesitate to say things that didn't work. What would be good to maybe avoid in your experience on certain things. So, Dimitra, what's worked? I mean, you've done lots of different things here. You've been at CNGL, you've been at Saarland, you've been all and doing here as a freelancer. What's worked and how you made it work?
Right. Yeah. So, how should I start? So, when I did my translation degree in Greece, I looked for something more applicable, more applied linguistics. So, through this exchange program, so through the Ionian University and Saarbrücken, I met then different people working on computational linguistics and MT. I attended some courses which I particularly liked because I saw something behind the typical translation field, theoretical, you can say. So in 2005, it was my first meeting with CAD tools, translation memories, and machine translation. And then I particularly liked MT, and then I was asked to do a PhD, so I continued with that. And I'm happy with that because, as you said, I moved to different places, met different people, and I think that it helped my career because it opens different new doors and different horizons. And this is important to see MT not only as a product from an end-user point of view, but it can open many research positions. So many universities work on MT to improve. So we have to see that MT started only about 30, 40 years ago. It's not so old, so everybody knows Google Translate and things that it's so old, but it's only released since 2009. So we have to see the background of MT and not say how many errors there are and the quality is not good, but see how it improved through the years. I think this is important.
Great, thanks, Dimitra. That's a good kind of overall. Like I said, you've been doing it in different places too. It's not just a single approach. You've seen different approaches and doing it. Some of the hottest places. I mean, in Dublin, that's where it's happening in research here in Europe for MT. So, Patrick, tell us your story. I mean, how have you made it successful for you?
Sure. Well, I've been interested in how I can use technology to make my work faster. So naturally, it's a tool that piqued my interest a bit. And I first started using MT with a program called Systran, the freelance version, back in, I think it was maybe 2003, somewhere around then. And what I found was it helped to automate a lot of dictionary lookups for me. And so, coming from when I started in 1999, CD-ROM dictionaries to me represented probably the state of the art, the newest technology that I was familiar with. And so, and I noticed, having gone from paper dictionaries while I was in university, and to see how much faster and how much more productive I was able to be during the times when I needed to do research, it was quite apparent to me. And so having the Systran work in the background was nice, simply as a dictionary lookup. Then as I continued to use the internet as a resource as it evolved, I started to get away from a lot of PC-based tools and using the internet. And I started using Google Translate at some point, but have never really found the quality, given that it's more of a general purpose tool, and I do some really industry specific kind of things, and so it's never been that adequate for my uses. I do use sometimes the web interface as a terminology research tool, but the APIs and I've actually designed some plugins for Trados to run with Google Translate and Microsoft Translate to get some more fine-grained control, but I don't really use them myself in production. And another issue is I do quite a bit of corporate internal type of confidential documentation, so it's not an option for me to use those public APIs, even if they were great, which I haven't found them to be. So that's what got me interested in using a system that I could use based on my own machine, and I got interested in the open source Moses project, and have just, I'm sort of in the initial phases of really experimenting with what I can do with my own translation memories, and I've had some fairly good results, some fairly surprising results actually, and in some cases with even relatively small translation memories that seem to work pretty well for the same client. So in other words, if I have a translation memory for one client in one industry, I can train a model with that, and it seems to offer me some pretty significant productivity gains. And just to try to quantify that a bit, I consider a significant gain to be around 25% as far as how fast I can be. I'm not looking for something that's obviously that's going to give me perfect results, or that I could let run unsupervised on a translation. So really, I'm just looking for a small productivity gain, and I've been able to get that using MT, and I've found it to be more than adequate for that.
Great, Patrick. That's what we're all wanting to know. You're giving some, the idea of 25% productivity here or whatever, and that's really good to see that another person's doing it who has kind of played around with the different free online systems and all that. Hey, Michael, you're doing it a different way. So how are you doing it? What are you doing? You're doing it a different way. Yeah, Michael might be muted. There we go. Michael, can you try it again? Can't hear you. Seem not to be hearing Michael. Michael, do you have a button or anything that maybe have muted or anything?
How about now?
You are online. Houston, we can hear you.
Okay, it's about time. So what was your question?
How are you doing it? You mentioned Cafe Trend. How have you been, you're doing it probably a different way than how others doing it, and how is that happening? Tell us really how you're doing it. It's the big guts of what you're doing here. Just do whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, basically I translate in Cafe Trend, which is a CAT tool, and so machine translation for me is just one of the various resources I use in the CAT tool. Cafe Trend's user interface is modular, which means that you can imagine it like blocks. You can move the blocks around, so you can have in one window you can have your translation memory. In another block you can have Google Translate. In another block you can have Microsoft Translator. In another block you can have a term-based, and in another one another term-based, as many as you want. And in another window you see the text in a grid. And so basically for me it's just one more tool in this user interface. And so I sometimes, if it looks good, I'll just use the entire, with a shortcut, I'll copy in the entire translation from Google Translate or Microsoft Translator, or ignore it completely. Or there's a new feature in Café Trend where you can send a selection to an online MT engine. So I can just select a word or 3 words or 4 words anywhere in the program, click a button, and it sends just that to any online MT engine I want. There's another feature which involves auto-assembly. I'm not sure how much people know about auto-assembly. So people that use Deja Vu might know about auto-assembly. It's basically where your cat tool tries to assemble the translation automatically using all sorts of resources, and you can set priorities and use different term bases or translation memories, online translation. And so the newest thing that Café Trend does is it takes your auto assembly results and it tries to automatically improve them using Google Translate. I'm not exactly sure how it works. You'd have to ask Igor. And it's quite new. But so yeah, a couple of us now have been. It's in the latest version, and we've been playing around with it. And what you get is you get in a little window instead of Google Translate, you get the improved auto assembly, and underneath that Google Translate. If that makes any sense to you.
Mm-hmm. No, that's good. That's good. This whole auto assembly has been brought up, over years. And I remember inviting April, actually, in 1999, to talk about that in a magazine I was writing for as an editor of, and they began to talk about it. Now it's good to hear that this is. Where are we today with that? Tell us, where do you think we are with auto assembly, or what are we going to call this assembly?
Yeah.
Where are we? Who has it? Who doesn't? What do you think?
As far as I know, Studio doesn't have it at the moment. Deja Vu 2 and the latest, I think 3 has it, obviously. They were known for it. I'm not so sure about other tools like WordFast Pro or Classic or whatever. I also know that some people love it, some people hate it. Some people switch it off automatically. For example, I tend to get better results, funnily enough, from Google Translate, depending on what I'm doing, of course, but than from auto assembly. But that's primarily, I think, because my main term base is a complete mess. It's way too big, and it really needs a lot of cleaning. But I have colleagues, Café Trend users, who translate very specific domains. For example, user manuals. There's a guy who does user manuals, and he basically says that Café Trend auto assembles pretty much. It auto assembles his target segment perfectly, except for the occasional, I don't know, like 85-90% of his target segment is ready to go. He just has to maybe fix a tiny bit of it. But he has highly trained term bases, very specific. Whereas mine's, like I said, mine's a mess. So I'm in the process at the moment of cleaning up my term base and seeing if I can get auto assemble to work as well as he has for it. Yeah, it's you need to know what you're doing with your term bases and your translation memories, and your material needs to be quite specific, or at least it has to mesh with your resources. Otherwise, it'll just end up a mess, and you'll switch it off.
Terminology is the thing that will make you or break you. And thank you, Mike, for that. Terminology. I know this is kind of a different subject, but how has terminology used in MT, and we got it in the rule-based systems. Terminology is an important thing with making dictionaries, and SMT and statistics isn't as last. But what do you think about the terminology aspect? Like you think, what's your point? What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I think that so terminology consistency is very important. I mean, most translation memories tools have also a terminology sub-tool, like the multi-term from STL. So it is very important to have a separate tool, I think, either a small one to support this terminology consistency, where you can add new entries, delete new entries, delete older entries, or save other candidate translations, etc. Now, I think that MT, and as you said, rule-based MT is very good at that. And very often so when I use MT, I'm surprised from the output, because I would never think of that if I wouldn't check a dictionary or something else. So from my own mind, I wouldn't come with this term. And I think this is very important, because from the human translation, you have to spend time, and thus with some post-editing after MT, I think the translation output is much better in most times, not always, of course. And this has been written also by articles that the post-edited MT is similar, if not better, in many cases compared to the human-generated translation. And as you said, the comparison between SMT, statistical machine translation, is based on probabilities, so it doesn't have to do with rules, but it copes better with exceptions of rules, so it is more robust, so to say. And just to give you an example about rule-based MT and SMT, so rule-based MT is very difficult to develop, as it needs more trained and linguistic stuff. So you need a lot of people who sit down and write rules for both the source and target language. You need also people to build lexicons, which is expensive because time is money. And compared to that, SMT is easier to develop because what you need is a parallel corpus, so big data sets of translated documents, and is more robust with rules. However, you don't have this grammatical correctness, this terminology, as you have with rule-based MT. So RBMT, the rule-based, was the more classic approach, how MT started. SMT is what the future is, in my opinion, so more hybrid engines. Of course, you have some rules in most MT systems, but SMT is a very sturdy translation model of the future. And just to give you an example, I checked Apertium today, so just to check one language. Apertium is a rule-based MT system, purely rule-based research system, but it is open source. This means that people can go there and change the source. It supports less languages, of course, as an SMT system, as Google, and it had a language which was called Tatar. I had no idea where this language is spoken to, so I had to go to Wikipedia to check this language. Tatar came first as a food and later as a language, and it is a language that is spoken by 5 million in Russia. It's a Turkish language, spoken in Ukraine, Finland, Central Asia, China, Turkey, and there is a Tatar English language pair in Apertium. So I think that this is great because you found a passionate speaker of Tatar and sat down and wrote these rules for this system. It will bring his community further translating Tatar documents. So this is the good point of rule-based MT. When SMT cannot work because Tatar English, there are not many bilingual corpora, I assume. That's it for me.
Great, Dimitra. Patrick, you mentioned a little bit earlier that you're doing very specific industry. You're doing it, and I would think that terminology is a key thing for you. How you've mentioned a little bit of you're trying to use Microsoft and being translated Google and all that, and it's probably not working so well with that. How do you think that your using of terminology and being able to build that into a resource of this package of using MT? What do you think is the impact of that with what you're doing?
Well, I would agree that terminology in any case is real. In my case, I'll get oftentimes a list of preferred terminology or a database of terminology from clients that I'm expected to follow. And so what I've found in some cases, I've tried two different approaches with that. One is I've actually tried to incorporate that as training data into training a model, and I find that can be useful, but it just and I haven't done a lot of experimenting with, and I'm not that familiar yet with how to apply weights to different sources of data. So I found it difficult to make sure that I put a certain priority on certain types of terms. So what I've done is as the others have said, I use the MT, then also in my CAT tool, I'll have the terminology database available to consult to know that takes precedence. Another approach that I've tried is the program that I use allows input, if you mark it up a certain way, glossary input. So I've tried to use that as input to the MT models. But in some cases, I've found that not to be effective, because what will happen is a lot of times I will get, that's only a one-to-one thing. A lot of times I'll get a terminology database that might have 4 or 5 possible translations for each source term or phrase. And so, and it's not always based statistically on how often they appear. It's just depends on certain contexts. So that's actually an area that I'm interested in trying to see how I can more effectively incorporate the terminology into my work.
Great, thanks, Patrick. Carolina, we're going to answer your question here that you came to the audience because it was something that I've been wanting to ask as well, and it's about about confidentiality. This comes up in the forma areas all the time. Can I use Google Translate? Can I use Bing the translator? What MT system can handle the fact that I, as a translator, am bound by non-disclosure statements and agreements with customers, and sometimes even in the contract is stated not to use something that will breach that. How do you three translators, these freelancers on the line, on the panel, how are you dealing with that confidentiality aspect? How have you done it? How are you doing it now? And this will answer Carolina's question and probably another 1,000 people watching this. So, anybody want to take it? Go for it.
I'll start. Yeah. Well, for me, it depends on the job. It also depends on the NDA I've signed with the client. Sometimes they will say, do not use online machine translation engines. Obviously, then I switch it off. But generally, they don't. And so there are various. It also depends on the type of material. You can kind of tell. And I mean, if the client says this is confidential, obviously you treat it more carefully. But very often, I'll just get sent texts, and they just want them back quick, and it's not exactly something that would be of any interest to anyone. There's no big trade secrets or anything, and so. But this question does sort of raise a topic which I've been thinking about, and for example, I went over to Patrick's to the website. He makes this plugin for Studio, and I noticed somewhere that. One of the little tricks that the plugin has is the ability to anonymize specific words in the text, and so prevent them from being sent to the online MT engine. It then replaces them with asterisks, which I think is an interesting idea, and one that I scribbled down last night, and I'm going to be talking to Igor, the developer of CafeTran, to see if we can stick that in too. Another idea I had recently was maybe sending the segments in the wrong order, because you have to imagine how would, I mean, well, and this is the problem also is do you think that Google is good enough to actually sift through these thousands and thousands of segments looking for information and use them? I mean, they'd have a real serious legal problem if they did. I doubt that they'll do it. I mean, I think they just use the source material to train their engines or whatever. I mean, I'm not a specialist at these things. Yeah, that's sort of. I mean, another trick that I use occasionally, or have used, is I'll use find and replace on the Word document before I start. So I'll go through it and I'll remove anything, any identifying information, translate that, find and replace at the end, for example. That's another way to do it. So that's, yeah.
Great. Dimitro, confidentiality.
I fully agree with Mika. So I don't think that I can add something more. Apart from that, I don't really have an answer, because I think that confidentiality is and will be a problem at the free tools. But this is general, the confidentiality and ethical problem. As soon as we are on Facebook and Twitter and everywhere, nothing is really confidential. So even Google Maps and everything that we use on Google, so as Mikael said, is used to train their systems. And free, of course, is good for the end users, but nothing is free for. So the companies are there to make profit, and we have to understand that and accept it. So we have the services for free, and we should appreciate that. But let the companies make their profit, because if you don't like the service, then don't use it. So we don't have to be so critical against many tools because they are free, and if we don't like them, just don't use them. So, but if they give us profit to our work, then why not? And again, I don't have experience with confidential documents or military or something else, so I cannot add something more on that.
Great. Patrick, what are you doing? I mean, how have you dealt with that? It sounds like you've dealt with this a few times, so what's your take on it?
Well, first I would say that I completely agree that the public APIs, there's I'm not, excuse me for the delay, I'm having a little bit of audio problems, but I'm not entirely sure that Google or Microsoft are doing anything with the data that's being sent. Like Michael said, it's doubtful. It seems like it's so much that would get sent to them. I don't even really know that they're using it to do any sort of training on that end. But that being said, you're pinging their servers and you're sending the text, and something that Michael mentioned about changing the order around, that's something that I hadn't thought of. That's kind of interesting. But in my case, when some of the documents that I translate are highly sensitive, and they contain, I don't really do trade secret kind of things, but I do things that are internal audits along those lines, where many of the documents explicitly say confidential for internal company use only. So to me, ethically, it seems like in those cases that isn't the kind of text that I want to send out, even if it's segment by segment and broken up. It's just a feeling that I have that in those cases. In other cases, I translate material that's published on the web, and Google is indexing it anyway. So it's like they're going to have it, and in those cases, I may use Google Translate, but to be honest, I've been fortunate enough to have good translation memories and be able to use some of my internal tools more effectively. And Michael mentioned my plugins. It's funny because originally the idea that I had to be able to replace things in the text, and I may expand on this if I'm pretty busy with translation, but if I get time to expand on my plugins, I would like to expand that a little more, and instead of just replacing with asterisks, allow users to choose different types of replacements, not only for confidentiality reasons, also maybe for performance reasons. And along those lines, as I look further into statistical MP, I'm interested in the issue of what's called data sparsity. And so if I have a company name in my text, it may not be as useful to a machine translation engine, just the company name. And whether or not I'm taking it out for confidentiality reasons, or I'm taking it out to be more consistent. So multiple sentences that are similar, just with different company names, from what I understand, from the data sparsity point of view, it can help a model perform better if you treat an entity like a company name as a more generic type of entity than the actual name itself. And that's something that I'm interested in. It's a little off topic, but it's somewhat related obliquely to the issue of confidentiality.
Oh, it's definitely related. I'll give my take on it. My new job actually at SAP is doing machine translation. It's because we have 75,000 internal and company employees that have internal content that they need to translate, and we don't want to give it to Google or Microsoft Bing for people to use. So I'm working on a team that's doing it for internal purposes and for exact thing. And some of the things that we consider or think about are, how do you anonymize text? Or then when you want to, if you have to use an outside thing, I've got boxes and boxes of empty software up here at home, because I do all these reviews and software. So I've got all this stuff, but sometimes I don't have it on another machine on something, and so I have to even use Google and Bing as well. And I will anonymize this stuff if I have to. If I want to take a company name or something like that, or use a part of a sentence, I do it too. Very, very carefully, and making sure that nothing can be used up. Now, I have friends that work at Google, and I've worked with the Microsoft team quite a bit. And I would say in general is that anything that's used is to train systems, but not as the second level test. So it's mainly for structures or for fluidity of the sentences or segments and being like that. But like I said, there's so much data out there that you have to deal with the dirty data of being polluting the system and how to clean it out. So there's quite a bit there that this confidentiality thing that really takes into case here. Question about let's call it the post-editing thing. We have productivity, and we see so many questions here in the different forums about those empty jobs. It's crap. We can start over from scratch, and we don't need to use empty. Of course, most people are referring to Google Translate and to Microsoft Bing Translator. But are you having to do that, or are you finding that there's you're getting productivity? You're actually, Mikey, or I think Patrick hinted to this a little bit earlier, but are you having to throw out of your stuff half the time or a quarter of the time, or are you just feeling that you're getting at least, maybe 50% or 25% gain, even if you've got to move things around in the sentence? What are your, Dimitri, what's your kind of take on that, of your productivity and improvements in general?
Yeah. No, I think that many people say that post-editing is the future of translation nowadays. That translators will become post-editors. I don't know how it will be in 10 years, but I think that post-editing is absolutely necessary for empty output. So without post-editing, the empty output cannot be published. And post-editing is nothing more, nothing less than just going to the cut tool and consider the empty output as if it was your translation memory candidate. So you go there and you edit the translation according to your knowledge, so to your experience, and then you sign off if it is ready, or you completely delete it and change it from scratch. So important is also then to read, of course, the whole text and not segment by segment. because then the fluidity of the text, as you said, is very important, and the accuracy. So I think that post-editing is absolutely necessary, and of course, empty plus post-editing saves time than translating from scratch. So I think this is out of question.
Great. Patrick, what's your, I mean, you mentioned a little bit earlier, but just to, again, for some people joined a little bit later, you know, cleaning up the text after going through the raw machine translation and reusing it, or, you know, and it's gone through raw, and you're gaining some, what do you think you're gaining in general? Maybe, or in specific types of industry sectors or something?
I think it offers me, it's rare that I'll be able to, speaking on a segment by segment basis, and I like to interact with my machine translation program that way instead of just batch translating a whole document at first. And so I'll go through segment by segment, and what I find is, in rare cases, I'll be able to use the output with no changes. Maybe it's for chapter headings or things along those lines. Very, very simple things. Some types of documents, Michael mentioned user guides. I also do user guides, and when the model has been trained on an engine for the same company, for example, it usually does pretty well, and I don't have to change as much. But what I think I most gain from it is, and it's something that Dimitra alluded to a little earlier, about the presenting translation possibilities that I may not have thought of or I may have forgotten about. And as long as I'm training the models with data from that company, or with preferably even with my own translation memories, it can help me stay consistent, because I don't constantly have to do concordance lookups, although I still do them. But it makes it a little more automatic, and so I've been able to gain some consistency in the work that I produce, as well as to help speed things up. Because when I go through some of the models that I use, I am able to actually just auto-populate the target segment and begin with that, and not have to go from scratch, and to be able to, maybe sometimes I only need to change a word or change the ordering around. But what I've found, especially, and I work on an ongoing long-term project that I've built up over the years, a pretty large translation memory, and it's all translations by me. So I'm pretty confident when I get the output from that, and I can actually see when the output comes out that it's, you know, and as I said, I have a lot more confidence in it, because I know that it's been done by me, and it's based on statistically the way that I've translated things in the past. As for just the more general issue of post-editing, I imagine, I agree that barely anything that I can do, I would be able to use the output unsupervised. There's absolutely no way I could do that. I recognize that there is a lot of data out there, and it's growing increasingly, and maybe there might be work in the future that involves a lot less need for quality and perhaps a lot more of light post-editing. So far, the kinds of work I do, that's not what I've come across. But I do recognize that sort of work might come in the future. But I think there's always going to be a market for high-quality translation that requires human review.
Great. Thanks, Patrick. I mean, Michael, we know that you wouldn't be talking here if you weren't getting some productivity, but what type of, I mean, you're trying to help people here kind of determine, and it does depend on what language pair you're doing, too.
Yeah.
But what do you kind of, what are your thoughts on your productivity improvements in general, with having put this all into this multi-frame cafe trend that allows you to have everything in one-stop shop right there, and you can use it rather than have to go off to 5 different 10 windows. You've got all one in place. What do you think is your productivity? I mean, some ballpark ideas of that.
Well, I don't have numbers, but it's, like I said, it's just another tool that I use, but it's a very useful one. And I do Dutch into English, and I've found Google well, and Microsoft Translator. They each have their own particular style. I can tell the difference. They do very well at Dutch into English. Not everything, but most things I throw at it, they're pretty clever, and so I think they speed me up quite a bit. I think if I had to switch off my little Google Translate and Microsoft Translator windows, I'd be annoyed because I rely on them for certain things. I also rely on my term bases. I'm a real lover of term bases and terminology, so for me, I get quite obsessive about my term base, and I spend a lot of time working on that. And now the auto assembly, I've been sort of recently trying to do that. But basically, in terms of productivity gains, if anyone's going to gain about the post editing, if anyone's going to gain, it's going to be me. So as a freelance translator, there's no way I would accept these job offers you see here and there for post editing work. If anybody's going to be doing post editing, I might be doing it, but that's my business. Part of my job might be post editing, machine translation output. If I choose to use that, if I choose to use something else, it'll be something else. But I think it's really dumb for freelancers, and I hope lots of people don't start doing it because new people might be tricked into thinking, oh, this is an interesting way of they're just starting out, and so they get offered a very low rate, but they think I'll do it anyway. I'm not really sure. I think in general, good translators should not accept post-editing jobs. If you want to use machine translation, figure out how to use it in your own system and charge the full rate, basically. But yeah, it's a constant source of interesting developments, this MT for me, because I'm in close contact with the developer of Cafe Tran, and there's a few of us on the mailing list, and so we're basically constantly throwing ideas back and forth in the list, and then Igor will implement one or will argue. And so far, I'd say it's just another one of my tools, but a very useful one.
Great, thanks. I just want to tell the audience that there are so many people here in the audience asking so many questions that ProZ is going to let go for another 12 minutes here. So we're going to go up to the top of the hour. There are so many great questions, we won't even be able to finish them, but we'll go around a couple, answer another question or two, and see our panelists' view on it. It would be good to hear from our panelists again what languages that you're working on using an MT type solution, and then what you think about other languages, and then I'll go ahead and answer a question at the end too, because I've worked on a lot of them. But Dimitri, what languages translating, and what are you using MT for, and what maybe ones you wouldn't? So.
Right. Well, I usually use MT for the major languages, so English, German, and also into Greek, and it's pretty good. So what I would like to say based on the language pairs is that we have to think that Google supporting so many language pairs. So the people have to know that it goes through English very often. So English is like the interlingua, and it goes from, let's say, I'm thinking now on random, so Korean into English, and then from Korean to Norwegian. That's because Korean, Norwegian, there are not many bilingual corpora, so that Google can train it. So all these language pairs that Google supports are there. Of course, the translation is doable, but it's not always great. So, of course, the translation for the major languages is much further better than for minor languages, or not minor languages. I would say many Asian, many Indian languages spoken by millions of people are not should not be considered minor, but are minor in regards to corpora and how digitally developed are these languages. So I would say that for many language pairs, like Asian, so I had a question before of my presentation, but Japanese works pretty good, Japanese English, but Korean and Chinese not so good. So as I said, this depends on how many bilingual corpora are available, and as this is the case more for the major languages, this is why for this language pairs works better than for less minority language, so to say.
Great, thanks, Dimitri. Patrick, I know you need to get going here quite quickly, so just what languages you're doing, so we can kind of remind the audience what you found it to be successful on for you.
Sure. I translate mainly Spanish and Italian to English and some Portuguese. And I've heard, I was at a talk about NT at the ProZ conference for ProZ recently, and I attended the NT session. And the speaker there mentioned, I think, that those language pairs, especially into English, tend to perform pretty well. So that might be, because I work in those pairs, that might be why my results have been good. I'm not sure. But yeah.
They tend to be the Romance languages tend to be those that have the longest history and have the word order and all that, the grammar rules in general. And then obviously too, when you're doing statistical things, there's more data. Like Dimitri was saying, there's more data available for those languages than other ones. So, Michael and Patrick, go ahead and cut off. I know you got to get going something else. You might be back in the chat line, and if you need to drop off, feel free to do that. We'll continue on here for the next 8 minutes with the rest of the panelists. Michael, just remind us what language you're doing or what you've done. You found it to be successful. With all of the rumors of it's impossible to use.
Yeah, but basically, I mean, my experience is limited to Dutch into English. I translate Dutch into English, and I've found it to be very good a lot of the time. Not always. I mean, you can always. There's always people on the forums, that try and find a funny example of where it went terribly wrong, and they're very proud of themselves, and then they think, oh, I've proven that MT is useless. But basically, just in my daily work, I see over and over again that Dutch into English, Google Translate and Microsoft Translator are very good at Dutch into English, and I don't know that much about the system, but I think people have said here it's a sort of a statistical hybrid system, and I know that Google in order to make it work, they need bilingual data, and so like for example, I collect bilingual data, Dutch English bilingual data, and translation memories. Usually this comes in the form of TMX. There's also a bunch of Moses files available online, but I don't know what to do with them. So for me, it's just TMX. But for example, I was on the Opus. It's an open source corpora website where you can download. Also, they collect bilingual data, and I look at the tables. They have these tables on the website, and they give it gives you an indication of how much is available per language. So they have these massive tables spanning every language you can think of to every other language. And if you go along, you'll notice very large amounts of data are available for Dutch into English, German into English, Spanish into English. I suppose there's all sorts of business reasons for this and internet reasons. But I have a feeling that those are the languages that are doing the best. The ones that Google and Microsoft can find good material for. Plus, they must have all sorts of web scrapers and stuff, aligners and all sorts of tricks up their sleeve, which I'd like to learn about. Because it's interesting stuff.
Yeah, very much.
So yeah, Dutch English basically, in my experiences. I just wanted to add, we were talking about free. I do pay for Google Translate. It's a tiny fee, but because it used to be free. I don't know if the listeners or the watchers will know, but these days, Microsoft Translator is still free because I never use that much for some reason. You do need an ID or whatever. But Google Translate, it works out at about, for me, $10 to $20 a month, I suppose. That's about it, really. It's virtually free.
Yeah, for the heavy use, because you're using the APIs too. So
yeah, I'm using the APIs.
Yeah, the Windows. So about 3 years ago, off the top of my head, maybe 2.5 to 3 years ago, the Google made their APIs, which are the links, using the links to go ahead and use it in some other application, became paid, and there was a lot of buzz around that. And then actually it happened for the others too. The online Google Translate box is always free. You have to go to that. But if you want to use it from another application and use that API to do it, then you pay for it. You pay for it in groups of usage. Okay, so you're kind of paying. It's like a pay-as-you-go phone card. You add credit to your phone card of a mobile phone. I got one of those. Well, it's kind of your pay-as-you-go kind of approach too for using Google Translate and all that. So, and that went up, and it's been up and down. A lot of criticism about it, but it's probably minimal for the types of usage that you're using it for. You know, the cost for it. So. And we just got someone said that they think it's $20 for like a meal. I couldn't remember the exact number here, but it's $20 for like a million terms or something. So something like that. I'd go check it out for those of you online. But
it's characters.
Characters. Probably characters or words. Which we have to double check. You know that. And I'll give my point of view just on the having worked. And I didn't actually tell everybody at the beginning. I've worked in probably 2 or 3 of these machine translation vendor companies, and worked at Carnegie Mellon Institute for Language Technologies, where we built NP systems, speech systems for the U.S. military, and for online public broadcasting of NBC television channel, and all kinds of things. So I've worked on a lot of these different. I've had lots of customers, Ford Motor Company and Caterpillar, and the missile, the whole European Aeronautical Space Agency, and Symantec, and Brother Printers. I've had lots of customers, and I would say that, and I've worked in user companies like now, so have worked in a lot of languages using Teams and doing it, and I would say that in the cases where we carefully planned and customized the systems to be able to, with dictionaries or intelligently using statistical systems with rule-based and intelligently doing it, no one ever regretted it. Okay? And not only that, it made it so it became bigger and bigger. And I would say that the fact right now that Symantec continues to use it. After I think this was in 2003, that's where I told them to go and talk to Sistrand. They're still using it, and they're talking about it, and they're doing conferences about it. So that's proof in the pudding. And they're doing different languages. They're doing people in with Chinese and Japanese, and now it's going to be best from English to an English and from an English with a lot of languages, and it may be to and from the languages that are specialized, like Sistrand is a French-based company, so the to and from French with a lot of languages is good. ProMT is a Russian company, so to and from to Russian. But when you start doing pairs that are not the native language specialty of the company where they're at, or the ones that they're working with, then it can be. And then the statistical systems depends on how well you're doing it, and how many people you've got, and how much you pay the people that do the development work. So I think a lot of those factors are there. But in general, if you're customizing things and spending energy and effort doing that, like we've talked about here, this is all customized examples of that, then it's great. So these are, I think, some of the key factors in being able to go ahead and be successful or not, and be able to say, hey, is it possible? Now, if we're going to do a kind of a hybrid mixture of, I would like to do Korean to Turkish, okay? I'm not sure that language direction, that there are a lot of specialized, MT vendors that have the Koreans and the Turkish speakers all working together to do it, and there would be a lot of work to be able to even get a statistical system to go ahead and do it. It would be a challenge, and to have the bilingual data available for those 2 languages that's already been translated, been trained on. I mean, I think that answers a big question, but for many languages. I'm going to Poland to talk at a translation conference next month. And I have installed Systrans version 7, the professional version on it, and with the Polish, English to Polish. And I'm going to play with it, and that's how I'm going to learn Polish for next month. So I think it's working for a lot of languages. It's getting better over time. And yes, there are errors or language directions where it's not good, and it's challenged, but it continues to improve with investments, people investments and time and money investments. So good. Well, so we've got other people that need to get going off the line here, and so I'd like to thank Dimitri and Mike. If you'd just like to give a sentence or two of your last statement of what you would encourage all these freelancers about, what would you say, Dimitri?
Well, of course, I would like to thank everybody to having attended this session. And my advice is to be not so critical against MT, to really try it out. So as you said, I think it's a great opportunity to learn a new language. Just try MT for whatever reason you want, you need. See if it brings profit to your work, if increase your productivity, it saves you time, of course it saves you money from depending on that, and see how you can continue. Customized MT is a step further from the free tools, but I would say just start with the free tools, see how it works for you personally, and then continue with a more specialized engine. And I am available after that through email, through Skype. So if you want to contact me and ask me any questions, feel free. So you can find my details on ProZ.com. Yeah, that's all from me. Thanks,
Dimitri. Michael, last statement for all these freelancers. We got 300 people in this audience right now. Words when they hear about this as a recording. So, what would be your kind of final statement to everyone?
Well, my final statement, I suppose, is I'm quite happy with the way I'm using MT in my CAT tool, CafeTran, at the moment. And so I would say, I suppose this maybe applies more to the geeks out there. If your CAT tool isn't doing something that you think it should be doing, ask the developer to try and implement it. Basically, this whole webinar has gotten me more interested in customized engines and stuff, and I use Google Translate as a plugin in my CAT tool, but I've become a bit more interested in customized engines and things like that. So I would advise people to start thinking about how to integrate customized MT solutions into just the everyday CAT tools, the big players, and maybe also do a little bit of thinking about how auto-assembly might be able to interface with machine translation. I'm not exactly sure what that would even mean at the moment, but I have some sort of vague ideas running around, which I'll be thinking about. And yeah, if anyone wants to ask me any questions afterwards, head on over to the CafeTran mailing list, Cafe Translators. It's a Google group. So you could just ask it. It's a nice atmosphere there. You can ask us any questions.
Great, thanks, Michael. And I would say to all the freelance translators, 20 years ago, I remember putting machine translation in place where people were still using pens and pencils 5 years before, and then they were using typewriters, and then we had the printers with the one-line screen, all that and everything, and then we came into the world of Apple IIs back then, and then 286s, and now we get Mac, and we have. Technology constantly increasing. Now everybody's using the iPhone and mobile applications to do things now. And that's not going to change. So the choice, and I think Dimitri, what you said earlier, is you can choose to use a tool or you can choose not to. And it's your choice. So if some are using it and it works and they're able to make a benefit for them, great. If you don't want to, don't worry about it. Do something else. And if a pen and paper is fine for you or whatever, use it. Use the tool that is most appropriate for your needs. And I think that's the kind of the overall thing that we've said in this whole panel. So over time, make it, select what you want. There is no such best car. There's no such best camera. There's no such best house or bicycle. You have to find what fits your needs and how it's going to be most successful for you, and you benefit from it. So thank you for our panelists. To Denise and Michael and Patrick had to drop off a little bit earlier. Thank you for the audience for your wonderful questions, and whoever can stay on. I'm going to stay on and answer questions on the chat line. So we'll try to like we said, contact us through the ProZ.com profile if we can't stay on, for those who can't stay on the chat, and we'll try to address all of your great questions. Thank you, everyone, for today, and thank you for ProZ for sponsoring this wonderful panel.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.